there are on-air people who it's a crutch. Like they'll have the websites open and the league websites that are awesome. They'll tell you the exit velocity and this and that, and they're just reading off with 125.2. You got to blend it. So just like making informed decisions in the front office, right? They're not usually getting hired because they can read off a computer screen when they're watching a baseball game. They're at the game. Their eyes, as a former player, should be seeing things at home. I can have the website open also if I wanted to. I can. Sometimes I do, but I'm not sitting above home plate as a former major leaguer, because I'm not, and seeing the game. Like that's what I want you to be doing. Numbers are there to help you. Use them. I'm pro numbers, but don't make that like your calling card either.
Welcome to the table. You're tuned into the Academic Boardroom with Dr. J and Dr. E. Pull up a chair. Higher learning, higher stakes.
Welcome back to the Academic Boardroom, a podcast where we sit down with power brokers shaping the future of education. I'm your host, Dr. Eli Joseph, and joining me is my colleague and partner in crime, Dr. Janice Gassam Asare. Today, we have a special guest, Jeff Bennett, who recently served as the Vice President of Talent Strategy and Research Data Analytics at the FanDuel Sports Network. Prior to his work at the FanDuel Sports Network, Jeff Bennett spent over 30 years at ESPN, where he served as the Vice President of ESPN's Stats and Information Group. He founded ESPN Analytics in 2010, and the team developed various metrics and tools that we know in sports today, such as total QBR, also known as quarterback ratings, football power index, basketball power index, and strength of record. Jeff won 7 Sports Emmy Awards for various contributions, including as a researcher on ESPN Sports Center and Baseball Tonight studio shows. Jeff, welcome to the boardroom.
Dr. Eli, Dr. Janice, thank you for having me.
I'm really honored. I'm really honored to be here because and to be here with Jeff because it's a full circle moment. Rob King, who was also I believe he was a senior vice president at ESPN. He connected us back in 2019, and interestingly enough, I applied to a sports betting analytics specialist role, and I didn't get the job. I was rejected, and I remember sending an email to Jeff like, by the way, Jeff, thank you so much, but I was rejected. And he was like, don't sweat it. Don't worry about it. And I'm glad that we were able to connect here again.
I hope you didn't take that the wrong way. I don't mean we flip it around. Don't sweat it. You didn't get a job you're looking for. But yeah, it was competitive. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not even sure we even filled that position as it was posted. We probably evolved it, because the sports betting industry was changing so much with legislation and things. So interesting time for that.
Yeah, it's all good. It's totally fine.
I have a question that I was wondering as I was looking more into you and reading more about your bio, Jeff. So I know that most people fall into sports analytics from math backgrounds, or maybe people who are like really interested in statistics. But I'm very curious about your origin story. Like, have you always been a numbers person, or was that something that came for you later on?
Yes, great question. Always a numbers person. From looking at the backs of baseball cards when I was 6 and memorizing statistics, dating myself. If the 30 years at ESPN didn't date myself enough, scavenging newspaper box scores and memorizing statistics that way. I did go to a school called Worcester Polytech Institute in Massachusetts, and it's an engineering school. The nickname of the school is the Engineers. So of course I was a math major. Everyone else I knew was an engineer, but I survived that. What ESPN didn't have was other math majors when I started there. Everyone there went to like Syracuse, Northwestern, schools with journalism, communications. I felt very much like a fish out of water there. But I was able to hook on my second role at ESPN with the research department, which I didn't really know what that was or meant, but I knew it meant sports history, which I was certainly qualified for. And they use calculators to figure out statistics. So I figured, well, if they use a calculator, that's close to math. There's numbers, unlike other people who just, not just, I don't mean that, but most roles involved like tapes and video. So to be able to use a calculator to tell in numbers to tell a story, that's how I kind of gravitated through that track through ESPN. And then right place, right time as the internet gained a footing and sports data became digitized and commoditized, where you can go on free websites like the reference sites, sports reference sites, and there's so many more where just the information age, sports analytics. When I went to college, I never heard the word analytics. There were any sports analytics jobs to my knowledge. People in the front offices were mostly former players. They weren't people who went to Ivy League schools or came up through scouting, or some people in front offices now, started with blogging and websites. Like in the 1990s, that was not how people got in team front offices across any sport. But right place, right time, and Michael Lewis writing the ball Moneyball, that opened a lot of people's eyes and some executive eyes at ESPN that we needed to have a more concentrated, higher level sports. They didn't even use the word analytics, but it was like a quantitative analysis team. And I got tabbed to lead that, and we made that the sports analytics team in 2010. I can get to those reasons later, but that's just kind of how it went. That's the abridged version. But yeah, a lot of right place, right time, and just seeing some opportunities and surrounding myself with some really, really, really smart people. I do not have a doctorate. I've often said there's not a lot of PhDs walking around the hallways in sports media, but the people that did have PhDs, I hired them. They worked for me. So great tip for any leaders: hire some really, really smart people, and surround yourself with as many of them as possible.
I wanted to jump in and ask you this question. Speaking of hiring, PhDs, as an executive, as a hiring manager, would you prefer a data scientist who loves sports or a sports expert who knows Python?
Well, they both have value. If I have to only choose one, I guess it would probably depend on what the project's goal was, what type of project it is. Ideally, you on the team you have people with some overlapping complementary skills, but also very different skills. So, sports expertise at ESPN, super important. Maybe at another company in sports, the expertise doesn't have to be at the same threshold that ESPN is, but you still have to know, a fair amount of sports to know what you're coding or what's meaningful in the results you're creating. Data scientists have tremendous value. Again, that wasn't even a term that existed when we started the sports analytics team. At least not. It wasn't very. If it was a term at all, it wasn't popular yet. So we were trying to figure out. We're specialists. We're engineers. Like what are we calling these positions? And then in a few years, data science was popping up everywhere, and people are studying data science and studying sports analytics and data science. And I wish we had that pool of people to hire when we started the team. No offense, I love the people we hired, but it just again exploded so quickly, and we were such positioned well that when we started expanding the team, we were flooded with people who had went to school to study sports analytics. I couldn't believe it. They didn't just exist a few years prior to us starting the team. So I'm dodging the question on how to answer that. Because I've had people who are sports experts who know Python and super valuable, and I've had people who are data scientists who like sports, maybe aren't as passionate. They both have value, but I'm going to be greedy and say I want both of them on my team.
Okay, so I have a question for you that maybe some of the listeners who are in awe of, your background and want to do what you do. So I have a question. So if a college student told you that they wanted your job, what would you tell them is important to study? And what would you tell them not to waste their time on?
I probably would say, well, I don't currently have a job. I'm a free agent right now. So watch what you wish for. Um, I wouldn't say my path is something that is anyone who wanted to take the long slow journey. I'm not sure people wanted 20 years to become in sports analytics. You want to get there quicker, and I would say they probably should. Um, there's so many avenues at the core level. Find some projects if you're a student, find some projects or topics you're passionate about. um, Find ways to show your work. Have a blog. Just sometimes, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, maybe in a different social media climate, people like Twitter was a really interesting place in like 2010, 2011 for people to make connections in the sports analytics industry and to bounce ideas off each other. So I don't know if X.com is that anymore. I'm pretty sure it's not. Um, but finding a place where you can show work, you can do some visualizations, you can get some feedback, you can get some peer review. I think it's really important. We have candidates, was at ESPN, and we were looking, we were often hiring people that we already knew about because they had a really popular website that was interesting, and they've done the work. And we had rarely did someone cross our desk that we'd never heard of before. And sometimes if that was the case, we would give them a side project as part of the interview process to see what kind of work they were doing. But the more reps you can get, now again, people who go to schools who can work in sports analytics and study that officially, which is amazing. I did just general math, applied statistics when I was at WPI. Now schools are getting awesome project work and partnering with teams or leagues. And they're as undergrads, they're getting great access. Usually, the biggest challenge is getting data. Because at ESPN we had proprietary data or data we couldn't share because of our league rights and league agreements, which made it challenging to work with students who wanted to work with ESPN, and because we weren't allowed to share the data that we were getting as part of a larger agreement with the leagues and the conferences. But yeah, I would say best if someone has a good project with the best available data. Like I'm not gonna say, well, your data is not good enough. Like the data is what the data is. It's what you do with it, and and being open about the results. People who be like, if I had this data, I would like to do this, but I don't. So this is the best I can do. And I get that. I think that's a good outlook in your own work and as long as you're asking the questions and asking smart questions, the data access could take care of itself based on professional role to move into.
As far as given your extensive background, I've said this before, and I say this again. You have an eclectic background. It's incredible. But I was wondering the difference in terms of working at ESPN, and building up the skill set that you need and the experience, and then you transition on over to FanDuel Sports Network. What was the difference in terms of the roles that you had and the responsibilities? And I'm pretty sure you have good experiences and bad experiences, but what were the differences?
I love working for both places. For those who don't know sports, I think most people know what ESPN is. I'm going to make that assumption right now. FanDuel Sports Network is hit and miss, and some of it depends on where you live in the country. It's a collection of regional sports networks in the Northeast, where we are right now and where I'm from. You can't get it; it's geofenced, so it's very confusing to people when I talk sometimes about FanDuel Sports Network. But we have the company has regional rights, and most of it is Midwest, South, all the way out to Los Angeles. But Northeast, think of the regional sports networks like the Yes Network or MSG or SNY or Comcast Philly and Nesson and Boston. Like we're like that's what FanDuel Sports is, but they're like FanDuel Sports Midwest, Ohio, Detroit, you know, West, Southern California. So they're everywhere else. Anyway, ESPN has huge resources, right? So I led a team of around 200 people at ESPN. At FanDuel Sports Network, when I got there, I was a team of one. At the end of it, I was a team of three, three people below me. So way different amount of resources. And, we did with vendor assistance, and I ran the vendor relationships at ESPN, but we had a team of people charting data, creating data, doing the sports analytics, doing the research, creating notes for talent broadcasts, putting things on the bottom line. At FanDuel Sports Network, we hired a company called Sport Radar, and they did 95% of the things that ESPN's full-time staff and part-time staff was doing. So it was being outsourced. Just a smaller group of people. So yeah, it was just very different. When I worked at FanDuel, it was much more about working with vendors relations because they were the ones I guess, embedded in helping the broadcast, and then trying to chart a path, the path was being charted for multiple years beyond 2026, to maybe, move some stuff around or grow in different areas, maybe build up some internal team a little bit larger, take on some stuff. Just never got a chance to do that. As we're taping this in April of 2026, FanDuel Sports Network's parent company, Main Street Sports Group, is in the news this week for they're shuttering the business. The regional sports networks are very volatile, and the rights of the 29 teams are returning to the leagues, NBA, NHL, and NBA. So it's a developing story. What happens to the 13 NBA teams that we just did our last broadcast on Sunday for, and then for the NHL, we have the coexist broadcast for the playoff teams that we have, which are 3 for the first round of the NHL playoffs. And then when our last team plays their last first round playoff game, then the network is sunsetting. So hence the free agency. But yeah, it's really balancing. FanDuel had such a small top that when I got there, I was able to do things beyond just research, data analytics. And I say just, but I got a role as the head of on-air talent strategy, which wasn't in my background. And I was trusted to help launch a show called Golic and Golic with Mike Golic Sr. and Mike Golic Jr. and help him launch a show with Stan Verrett formerly of ESPN Sports Center called Countdown Live. So I was able to do a lot of really cool things in a short amount of time. At ESPN, I was the vice president of ESPN Stats and Info, and this had so many more people there. So it was cool to kind of work at a place that felt a bit more like a startup. Not as cool as when that startup fails, which happens to startups as well, but it did feel like a startup that was, as I say, built upon the bones of what was at one time a thriving the Fox Sport regionals across the country. And then they went into a real hard time in the early 2020s, changing names to Bally Sports and whatever, bankruptcy, got rebranded to FanDuel Sports Network. I came aboard soon afterwards, and it lasted like less than 2 years, unfortunately. And that's that.
So I have a follow-up question that is kind of a pivot, going back into the academic realm. So do you think in your experiences that universities are actually preparing students for careers in sports analytics from what you've seen? Or do you feel like a lot of the learning is like on the job?
Well, I think they're more prepared than ever. Some people are really bright, are getting good projects, are thinking about sports in pretty advanced. When I speak to students, and I was certainly doing it a lot at ESPN. I also had a network of people that I would consider myself a mentor that I would check in on. Who, anytime anyone reached out to someone at ESPN and said, "Hey, my son or daughter or neighbor is interested in sports analytics or is in the sports analytics club at their high school," oh, let's reach out to Jeff Bennett. And I always was like, that's great. I loved speaking 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I still catch up with people who now work for the Chicago Cubs or wherever that I knew when they were maybe at a crossroads as a freshman, sophomore. So always been impressed in I guess the ecosystem, because I didn't have that when I went to college. I wish I had sports data and I had the foresight to see what you could do with that kind of career, and even knowing a career like that even existed. I didn't know that when I was 2021. So I'm always impressed when I talk to students. That said, there's no learning on the job. There's no way to replicate that. And I never went back to college after I graduated in May of 1994 with my BS in math. But I learned so much at ESPN, um, both about how to be a researcher, how to tell stories, what is sports analytics, how can I build a team. I learned about being a pre-call manager. I learned about being an executive. I learned about the business side, things that when I was in my early 30s, I thought was like, oh, I never want to deal with contracts or legal or any of this. And then, 12 years later, it's like, this is like every day of my life. And I found I enjoyed it. So there's no substitute for getting a job that gives you opportunity to kind of stretch your boundaries in maybe ways you didn't even know that you'd even like, or you find out, hey, I don't like this. I was right, but I had a chance to sample it in some way. ESPN is an amazing place for that. It's such a huge company with so much opportunity. Um, and strangely, FanDuel Sports, which was so small, there's also a lot of opportunity because they just needed people to do a lot of different things and wear a lot of different hats. So I was extremely lucky to work in both places.
Now, as far as at ESPN, you were able to cultivate a new division, right? A new realm of ESPN Analytics, right? I was wondering, how do you convince a legacy institution to stop trusting their gut or their opinions and then start trusting the data?
Yeah. Wow. That was a rewarding and challenging time. It is hard. It is hard to introduce a whole new language of sports to people that were already at ESPN and considered themselves sports experts. And if they're on air, most people considered them to be sports. They were famous, or they were a former coach or player. And they got to where they got without sports analytics for the most part. So we saw some avenues. We focused very much on one product at a time and put the team was 4 people, the entire team's efforts on one project, and then we all pivoted to the second project, and that was what we lived and breathed 20 hours a day. So the first one, as you mentioned in the open, was NFL total quarterback rating. And kind of like our North Star was to improve the NFL passer rating, which had been around since 1973. It was developed I think with a slide rule and maybe a napkin. It gave the people assumed it was really complicated because a quote unquote perfect score was 158.33333. So that sounds hard to figure out on your own and also not intuitive. But you realize it was just a 4-step process that took quarterback play using 4 inputs, which was pass completions, pass attempts, yards, I guess 5, touchdowns, interceptions. That's it. Was touchdowns interception ratio. So that's point. And that was it. And it had some sort of divide by 3, multiply by 4, blah, blah, blah. And if you did hit the thresholds and divide by whatever, the answer, if you were, at a 250 passing yard game and you're 20 of 26 for 4 touchdowns, 1 interceptions, you're quote unquote perfect. So it had a ceiling, it was upper bound. People don't understand it. It was escalating every year because the game was changing completion percentage. And at that time, when we were doing this in 2010, Michael Vick was a dynamic quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a very strong passer and had some good passer rating games and seasons, but he was known for what? Running. Yeah. Right? So quarterback play was not like this Dan Marino or Joe Montana. No, I mean, those guys are greats, but the game was changing in a way where so we're just not counting that as a play. A quarterback is running for first down on 3rd and 7, and that doesn't count. It didn't count fumbles, which quarterbacks, when they fumble, that's a disastrous play. It's behind the line of scrimmage. It's oftentimes picked up the defense. Sometimes the defense picks up the scores. Yeah. It didn't account for sacks, which is every sack is not on the offensive line. When we study it, we're like, this quarterback takes sacks all the time because they hold the ball too long or just a bunch of reasons. Like it's in sacking. And other guys would get rid of the ball fast and throw it away. The Mannings almost never took sacks. So again, that's a negative play. So we just want to say, what does everything a quarterback do? And then the biggest thing is NFL passer rating had no context, like no context. You throw for a garbage time touchdown and a blowout, touchdown. It's like fantasy sports where, we were like, it's situational. Like if you have a 12-yard completion on 3rd and 10, like that's a huge play in the game. NFL's passer stats were context neutral. So we created a bunch of frameworks. We created what was called expected points model. So we knew every point on the field and every down, what a team's chances of scoring are. And then we took the before and after expected points added to the play. And that was the credit we were using, the denominator, I guess, the unit we were using to determine if the play was successful. We did a ton of analysis to say, well, okay, now, but how much of it was this is their secret sauce? How much is the quarterback and how much of it is his 10 teammates? So incredible amount of analysis on every type of play we could do to decide, because there's a difference. If a quarterback, I'll go to 3rd and 10 again. If a quarterback completes a pass on 3rd and 10 and he throws it 11 yards and the guy catches it and, he's across the line of scrimmage, across the first down line, and he gets tackled right away. First down, a lot of credit to the quarterback. If it's also that same 3rd and 10 and the play breaks down, and he's like, I'm his 4th option, I'm going to throw it to my running back who's 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he scampers for 12 and gets the 10 yards. Like, still a great play for the team, same outcome for the team, but more credit for the running back and probably some blockers. The guy who just dumps the ball 3 feet away is not the same as threading the needle. So that's just an example. Obviously, the NFL stat, which was designed to be also a box after the season, look at it to determine the passing title as it was on an individual level. So to do like situational, who are the best NFL passers on 4th or when trailing, like media was using this archaic stat to tell stories and splits that it just wasn't useful. And we knew we could do so much more. So anyway, long story short, dove into a project, put all our efforts into it, tried to teach people about why this was a better tool, make it more like a tool than a stat. And then once we got the trust, moved to college basketball to beat then was called the RPI, which the committee was using to select teams. And now they use all sorts of metrics, including 2 that we developed at ESPN as part of the committee sheet. And now they're seeding teams better. And sometimes it's too well. There's fewer upsets because in the first round, because teams are seeded better, but they have better data. In college football, it's the same way. So we found the opportunities where we could make a big improvement. We didn't touch baseball because baseball was just more mature in that space. And yes, maybe we had a couple ideas, but it just wasn't worth our time to go deep into like making a baseball stat when there was just so many people working on that. We're like, but college football, nobody was working on it. And ESPN had the best college football data in the world. And then we had the smartest people working on it. And then we came up with, our resume metrics and our predictive metrics. So that's how we attacked those. And then it was just, my role was not to be the data scientist. My role was to be someone who asked the questions, was curious, knew enough about it, could something didn't pass the smell test to ask questions why, or let's take another look at that. And then I was the kind of the evangelist internally for it. So I was meeting with show groups, and we'd have preseason seminars by sport, and going to the Sloan conference every year and trying to roll that out and talk to people. I was just hitting the trail, talking to people, communication. That was what I could do, and finding new ways and trying to, I guess, iterate the message where knowing who I was speaking to. And I was really trying to talk to people in their own words. So they weren't frightened by the math. So, if someone was, you putting with everything into the realm of what sports terminology is and not coming at from a math perspective. That was, if he came at it from a math perspective, it was a huge turn off the TV.
Those people.
And also, knew I had a strong feeling that there were some pain points. There were people internally at ESPN who were against it, thought it was stupid, a waste of time. rooted to fail. If we predicted a team was going to win and they didn't, we were like, they talk about it on air, like, haha. It was like such a weird thing. So we have a lot of battles we lost, but like, I just knew I felt very strongly that people were going to start working at ESPN from teams, 3, 4 years down the road, where analytics was a part of life for these teams. And this wouldn't be the first time they heard the word analytics when they came to ESPN, because they'd heard it when they were for the Cleveland Guardians, or whatever, for Golden State Warriors. They've touched analytics, or been part of their scouting, their preparation, or whatnot. So analytics at that point was growing everywhere. It's algorithms and how you stream videos, and everything was we're a little bit scared of that. Like, people maybe are scared of AI now, but people would just be scared of algorithms. So yeah, we try not to use that word, because that would be a trigger for some people, even though that was how we were writing the code, but in the background.
Yeah,
As
I'm
far
curious. Your knowledge is so vast, and you've been doing this for decades. So, and you can be honest with us. Do people in sports analytics actually read like academic research? Like, how do you continue to stretch your knowledge? Because I'm sure from the year you started, when you graduated with your BS from Worcester, how things have evolved so much now with AI and all of that. Like, so how do you continue, especially as like an OG in this space, how do you continue to stretch your knowledge? Do you read academic research? Do people in sports analytics actually read academic research? I'm just curious how you stay up to date on everything that's happening in the sports analytics world.
Yeah, it's a lot to consume. Um, I I think I use the term, I know enough to be dangerous. Yes, when I go to a conference, I'll look at try to carve out some time to look at the posters, where the students are coming up, and learn something and ask questions around that. I try anyone who goes to a big conference and there's a whole hallway full of posters or workshops, and they're ignoring that to go to the fancy, A-lister panel, probably not taking advantage of the opportunity. So I'm always trying to get that. Now, there are people. Yes, the answer to your question, Doctor, is certainly people. People that were on our team were going to joint statistical conferences. We would fly them out there. They'd present there. They would learn. Disney has a data analytics group meeting every year, DDAC, in August in Orlando. We would send people who present there as well. We'd learn. There's tremendous published works that people were doing and learning from. And some of the early work we did, we partnered with Dr. Benjamin Alomar, because he did a study on who owns the plate in baseball. And we used that kind of division of credit to help us with the examples I was saying about football with quarterbacks. So, and we hired him as a consultant to help with a slice of that, working on some academic work, building on some academic work he did for baseball, which is another part of sports analytics I love. Or when you find something interesting, cricket, whatever, so many of those building blocks can be ported over to a different sport. Not all sports are like that. There's some fundamental differences in how some sports are played. Some are more free flowing with like very, very few stops in the whistle. Like a soccer, obviously. Baseball is very discrete. Batter pitcher matchups, pitch, pause, pitch, inning. Football has start and stops. The clock is very important. But there's aspects of these different sports that I love, and that's one of the great parts about being on that ESPN team, is we did all these sports, and we were aware of what was happening in all these sports. Maybe we weren't doing new baseball work, but we were very aware of what was happening with the rise of all-encompassing statistics like wins above replacement and some of the more advanced stuff. And then we're like, okay, what's that look like in a different sport that we're trying to do? So there is a real tight-knit community of academia in sports analytics. I came from UConn Sports Statistics Symposium in Stores. I was there on Sunday, just popping in. It's in my state I'm in, and I had a bunch of friends who used to be on the analytics team. One works at Google, who flew east to be on the panel, and who's originally from Connecticut as well. So you had a family trip in there, and it was a great gathering to see a bunch of people. But again, students there asking questions, having access to real leaders and pioneers and people making difference right now. 2 people were there for working on the, who worked for a WNBA team the day before the draft, and they were at this conference. Like, how do you have time for this? Like, he's got a conference call a half hour ago in the corner, but now we're on this panel. But like, your draft's tomorrow, and it's free agency. Like, WNBA is huge right now. I can't believe you guys are here. But yeah, I love when the community is still very tight knit, and they are aware of what other people working on, and reputations matter. What I loved about ESPN is there's a lot of theoretical stuff out there, and we were able to like put it into practice, like making it public. People doubting that ESPN could do this, I get it, because they think like the forward-facing Stephen A's or now Pat McAfee's, like, of course they're not working on this. Like, it is people who have the chops. You got to trust us.
And that actually, I have a follow-up question to that, because I've been thinking about this. So there are professors who are publishing papers in sports analytics that likely haven't worked a day in their life in the industry. How do you feel about that? Because I know in a lot of different fields and industries, there's this like scientist practitioner gap where people who are doing the research aren't necessarily in the field and vice versa. And there is a lot of really great research, but people who are doing the work aren't actually maybe reading it sometimes. So does that bother you that there are professors maybe who are publishing research who haven't worked in the industry, or do you think that adds value?
Total sum adds value. I'm sure, and I'm sure there's some pieces if I would read it, I'd be like, oh, if they only knew. It's not so easy, or they're limited by the data they have, and that's all they can do. And I just have to be like, I get it. That's where you're at right now. There's sure, certainly. I even my own career, I was doing some stuff, may I say 20 years ago, that I'm like, oh, I can't believe I published that. Like, that's awful. But I didn't know any better. That was so embarrassing. I'm not saying that's what these examples are. Yeah, it's hard getting, like, even people who work professionally have awesome ideas and can be tuned out by their organization. A new general manager could come in, a new coach or manager could come in, and there's new leadership, and maybe the owner who worked in finance is like, oh, we have to have an analytics person. But if they were just doing something in a corner, that's good and could be impactful, and they don't have the trust of the organization or the decision makers, they're going to be frustrated and they're going to leave. So even being in the field where you're living and dying with every team victory, not everyone has the same experience, because some teams organizations are more committed to it than others. So maybe they go out and they just publish their work, and that's how they get their outlet. I don't know. But in general, more people building on really good ideas, people passing around interesting concepts, people asking good questions if they can't get the answer because of a data limitation. At least we're moving the ball in the right direction.
I wanted to touch base on sports betting here. Now, obviously, right now at this recording, we have MLB games going on right now as we speak, and we have students we probably pass by who may have placed a bet. What are your thoughts on obviously legalized betting within an environment here like New York? And do you think there should be some form of a sports betting literacy course or program throughout all the institutions here?
I mean, education is important. There's a lot around responsible gaming. It's a huge topic, obviously, especially when it comes to young people. I'm glad it wasn't legal when I was 20 something and had no money and thought I knew everything about sports, and I thought that was my angle in life. I didn't, thankfully, place a bet. I don't think I placed a bet until I was well into my 40s. So it's a little bit scary how accessible it is. But I get the appeal. But I do think overall more education is needed. It's not the Wild West like it was. Now it's actually pre-regulated. But you're seeing with prediction markets, right? The access to that. It's not sports betting. It's not legalized sports betting, but there's a lot of like, if I want to bet on the play in basketball games, I could do it on Kalshi. I don't have to be in a state that has, legalized sports betting. So there's a reckoning to come around this. So yes, I think it's an amazing tool for sports analytics because we are always measuring ourselves against the markets. We're trying to create independent predictions without any sort of Vegas inputs. I'll say Vegas as a broad term, and try to create power indices on our own without pre-canned Vegas over-unders. That gives you a sense of how good a team is expected to be. We are trying to get to those predictions on our own based on everything we could do. And then we compare ourselves to the Vegas lines all the time, and we still do. On the back, I say this is often when I do this, but ESPN Analytics still on the back end has a system that every day you can look in. It's not exposed to the public, and it's how close mean square areas on the predictions, the predicted scoring margin, where the biases are, if any, and and how it stacks up against other public systems, how it stacks up against the closing line, the opening line, for the books. There's a lot of information in sports betting that helps really fine tune predictive metrics. Even player props really do probably help you get a sense of you could fill out a baseball lineup with that information. It would help you, or any sport lineup. But yeah, there's a lot of when it comes to students, I get a little squirrely on that.
Also, and we touched base on this prior to recording. What are your thoughts on prediction markets and how disruptive have the prediction markets has been in relation to sports betting, like the traditional DraftKings and FanDuel?
Yeah, I think it's a moving target. I'm sure I don't work for FanDuel proper or DraftKings. I'm sure there's a lot of internal conversation around prediction markets, or some of the smaller betting companies who maybe are having trouble penetrating the marketplace that kind of duopoly of FanDuel and DraftKings in the United States have. And they see, well, maybe prediction markets are predictive. That's the way to go. And of course, predictive markets are more than sports. So there's a lot of stuff there. I don't know how. I mean, it's something certainly worth keeping an eye on and in following. I don't know which direction this is going in. Do not know what this means for the U.S. sports betting companies. How concerned they are with this. If they're concerned at all, I assume they are. But yeah, I don't know how it's going to play out. I really don't. I don't have a guess on that.
I mean, I think that's the beauty of using analytics as well. You just don't know. You don't know until something happens, and it's like, okay, now we need some legislation, or now we need a law. Now we need to do something about it. You just never know.
I'll just say something real quickly about that. It's not exactly what you're talking about, but I think some people were scared of. This is not your question, I know, but it made me think of this from earlier. The reason people were resistant to sports analytics is because they felt territorial that this number was the authority, or being positioned as the authority, when most of these, rarely is it 0% or 100%. There's usually a range of chances, or even if someone's QBR was 80, doesn't mean which is from a 0 to 100 scale. It's a system of ranking, but there's a question why? What powers that? It's just a gateway and a tool. I get a little. I think people get a little freaked out by analytics, thinking that's a sports conversation ender or argument ender. It's not. It just shouldn't. It's another data point, but it's about analytics about arming people to make better decisions and using data and other things to help inform, but not be the sole. That's why the best organizations have analysts and scouts. This is not to replace the scouts, which was a big post Moneyball fear, that teams are just fire their scouting department and just have a bunch of people who never played the game. There's great value in playing the game, or have seen the game, or it's still played by humans last I checked. but humans make some really bad decisions, and go on gut or go on certain, use other biases where the data will at least, a good system sees all the plays in context. And even a good system is not perfect. So even knowing what the system doesn't have, that data doesn't exist, because you have to keep updating the models robustly, as leagues now have, 10 years ago put chips in shoulder pads, and now there's cameras everywhere, and like all this GPS data comes, and someday maybe the biomedical will be part of it, that's being captured by like Catapult and stuff. Right now it's not merged in a public way, but them teams are using that for sure. Like, you can always get better. You just have to know, like, where are the holes, and humans can do a great job of filling those holes in. And just because a great model says a coach should go for on 4th and 2 because there's a 51% chance of being successful, it's a 49% chance. Like, that is immeasurable to a human being. So maybe going for it is the quote right decision, but there are what's on your play sheet. What are you seeing from the defense? Like, it's, unless it's, I mean, there's some egregious ones, obviously, like that submarines your chance of winning. Punting there is a bad idea, or going for that sometimes could be a bad idea. But oftentimes it's a little bit more grayer than it's maybe being shown on TV or on an app that says you should go for it, and it's like, but the margin's super super thin. So anyway, that's a tangent, but that got me thinking.
There you go. I also wanted to get your thoughts on, started to laugh a little bit, because whenever I go on Twitter, right, and Twitter's a wild, wild west in my opinion, but I would go on Twitter and I would visit and see the comments based on a game that I'm watching, and I would have people saying this is rigged, or what's going on, this is a stupid play, and the DraftKings or FanDuel said that there is a 6.5 point spread, but this team's getting blown out. What's going on? Do you think that some of the information, or some of the reaction that we get from Twitter, is it like a misinformed, or is it just out of just pure anger, or someone's losing their money or something like that?
Thankfully I'm not really on Twitter, so but I can put myself in that space mentally to imagine what it must be like during a game. Fans are emotional. There's a wisdom in the crowd for sure, but there's a lot that fans don't understand. Humans don't understand probability. I don't know if you guys know that, but I will. That's a hill I will stand on to the end. One of the things that I really learned in starting the sports analytics team, trying to roll out probabilistic, predictions and things of that nature, is like, if someone hears like 60% in their mind, it's 100%. Like, oh, you're wrong. Like 3 out of 5 versus 2 out of 5. Like, do you understand like how thin that margin is? 55% versus 45%. Like, that could go either way really, really fast. I feel bad for weather people, but that is something that we really like. I think I just made some assumptions about my coworkers in the sports media space, because I was familiar with numbers and had thought about thinking about my life. Should I cross the street or not? What's the chance I get hit by this car? If the lights, I've lived that way all the time. Many people are not wired that way. And when we were rolling out, this team is favored or has this percent chance, and maybe one against Vegas or common conventional, they're all usually slight favorites, and people would be like freak out, like it's crazy. And that happens sometimes with live betting odds. So if a team in your example is, still sick, maybe the better team at home falls in a hole and they're still favored, that's a hard concept to wrap your head around, because you feel like, well, they don't have it today. They're not coming back. Comebacks happen. There's some, when you're at home and you are the better team, you're gonna have leeway. In the other way, if you get out to a hot start, you're gonna have a very high chance to win, or that in-game scoring margin is gonna be higher than the game started at. The people making these live markets are pretty strong. Like, they know what they're doing. So anyone that questions that, I guess I'm not sure why. People, there's a long track record of the people who do this, like, winning. But anyway, so yeah, but people have an emotional reaction, especially when it's their team. Um, and for some sports, I know we rolled out college football, like college football fans, super passionate, very territorial, very parochial. Uh, and just that's a sport that never had data, just never. I mean, they crowned champions on writers' polls when the games weren't even on TV. Like, I don't even know how guys were filling out and women were filling out their top 25 when you couldn't watch more than one game at a time. And that's how you like national champions, two national champions because the two split polls.
Yeah.
And then BCS came in 1998, and that was the computers, and everyone freaked out about that. And then they basically denuded the systems to become just the black boxes that didn't use scoring margin. They didn't have a single job. And then that was derived. The people hated the BCS era. So here comes the CFP, which was going to be humans. And they went back. I was looking at my notes not too long ago, and the committee was like leading in hard. Finally, humans, not computers. This is 2013, 2014. If you look now, the committee it's the correlation between their top 25 on week-to-week basis and their final rankings is almost exactly what the metrics have every week. And they have these sheets that give them predictive numbers and then resume-based numbers. And, our team at ESPN came up with this kind of dual way of approaching it where it can't be a one-shop all metric. It has to be something that measures quality, which we came up with strength of record, which is like the most deserving, and some of which is the best, which is the predictive. If these teams play 100 times on a neutral field, who wins more often? Well, that's a way to describe who the better team is. Maybe they're not going to win that particular matchup, but we think we have enough information that they were the better team. And then again, strength of record is everything looking backwards. And we blew the committee's mind. We got to actually speak to the committee and the head of the committee 2 different years for ESPN about no, it's actually you need 2 different metrics. And it's not blending them like the BCS and averaging and throw out the higher, lower number and divide by 6. Like, it's crazy. No, it's like these are the metrics that tell you how good teams are, which works for seeding. These are the teams that tell you how accomplished they are. And this is, as they build their resume through challenging games and hopefully victories, they should be invited to the postseason. But to blend them together is where things get muddied, and then you're not telling a story at all. And then you can't unpack it when there's a weird, well, why is that team above that team? They beat them earlier in the year, and now they're behind them. And if you mix them together, you'll never get an answer that's satisfactory. So I'm not sure how I got there in that answer.
You're good.
But that is something that that I learned a lot working at ESPN is splitting things into what problem we're trying to solve, and then being very laser focused on getting a solution to that.
I have one final question.
That's it. Come on.
One final question. If there's one particular skill that you would highlight that can help you navigate through whether it's uncertainty or growth in your career, what would it be?
You're saying going forward, or what point in my career, or anyone's career?
I'll say, you know what? I'd say starting, going forward, and navigating through uncertainty, whether it's termination, contract, terminations, layoffs, things of that sort.
Well, I'm in uncertain. I guess I'll make this about the present. I'm in an uncertain time right now. I don't know what's next for me. But yeah, so you have some sort of experience. No matter where you are in your career, it could be the beginning of your career. You have experiences, hopefully, from things you did. When I started ESPN, it was here are the things I did in college. Here are the projects. Here are the challenges they had to overcome. And here are the things I need to learn. And what are you doing to better yourself on your own? And there's more resources now than ever with great YouTube videos and online classes, and there's so many things. AI, we didn't even talk about AI. It's a whole nother podcast, obviously. AI in sports in sports analytics is just a small slice of it. Uncertainty, there's, you want to have a plan. Wherever you are in your career journey, you want to have a plan. You see yourself, I want to be X here and X and Y years, and prepare to don't hold yourself so rigorously to that plan. At least for me, I mean, I never would have dreamt when I was stocking the shelves and putting barcodes on tapes that I would have a math job at a sports media company, and I would have the ability to oversee people. I could barely oversee myself as a 22-year-old at ESPN. That I would be being trusted with the lives of other young people someday, professionally, not those are the kind of lives I was overseeing. I'd be able to hire people, work with, legal and contracts and all the things I thought was like boring. Who wants to do that? So be open. It's such a long answer I'm giving you.
Now you go.
Just be open to new experiences, and use your network of people. Use the people, and the network might just be your professors if you're 22, or peers who are finding ways, or your parents. It's okay to listen to your parents too, occasionally. Use the people and help chart that journey, and then stay in touch. Maybe you don't get that job in 2018, and that guy says, "Don't sweat it." Call him back up again.
We never know.
Come on a podcast. And be there for people when the times are good. I love the fact that I was the person that everyone thought of at ESPN when they had someone who said they want to be in sports analytics. That usually freaked out the person who was, "Oh, you work at ESPN," and they would get onto my inbox, and some of the most rewarding conversations was learning from the kids. And what are you studying these days? What's your course load? What product work are you doing? What internships are you doing? What do you want to do? Sometimes, like, I wouldn't be able to help them that much because what they want to do is in sports, not quite what my background is. But oftentimes I would just give them some general advice. I think that it was helpful. And I'm still, again, you never stop learning. I'm in my 50s now, and I don't know what's next yet. And I am in New York City in part to meet with people and get their opinion on what they think I could be doing or how I could help their organization, and keep my options open. LinkedIn has been a great tool for me to connect with people, to see people that are out there. I go to conferences. I popped in. I said to stores a couple of days ago. I wasn't able to make Sloan this year because I had a work commitment, but that was the first time I haven't gone to Sloan in 16, 17 years. So you take advantage of the opportunities that you have, but you should never stop learning. Never stop learning. One of the great things about sports is there's so much to learn. Even if you just break it down to a single sport. At one time, I was the Baseball Tonight lead researcher. Never in my life was I like, all right, got it. Baseball since 1876. Know everything. What's next? Never. You learn something every single day, in sports especially. So be open to learning, and continue to be curious. Be a good teammate. It doesn't matter where you are in your career spectrum. Be a good teammate. We used to say at ESPN, we want all-star teammates. That's like table stakes. If you're not a great teammate, I don't think you're going to be successful.
Yeah, you won't last. You won't last at all.
That was
Well,
wonderful advice, Jeff. It was so great to chat with you and to hear about your extensive experience. I hope that this episode is really insightful for people who are studying sports analytics or people who just started in the field. But it was such a pleasure to meet you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It was all mine.
Jeff, we appreciate you for joining the boardroom, and we are signing out.
The mind of a scholar and a business-minded soul. We at the Academic Boardroom, yeah, we keeping it 100. If you're looking for the truth,